All right, good to be with you today. If you're with us online, we're so glad you're here, whether you're here now or during the week. I'm Chip Freed, the lead teaching pastor here. So great. We hope you feel a little of the spirit that we're feeling with us. We're in a new teaching series that we kicked off last week. We didn't kick off. Nia Quoby kicked it off. I tried to call off sick today because I didn't know how to follow that, to be honest with you. She's my sister, but she called down fire from heaven last week, I'm going to tell you. And we had Baptism Sunday. How many of you love Baptism Sunday? Man, there's a reason the early church always did baptisms on Easter, because Easter was the Christian's new year, new life. I said last week, Easter is not a holiday. It's not a Sunday. It's a lifestyle. When Jesus walked out of the tomb, he wasn't showing off. He wasn't saying, oh, great, now I get to take you to heaven. He was empowering us to live new life. And Peter says that thanks be to God for God's mercy, that we are born anew in a new life and into a living hope. That's what our point is, living in hope. And I'm talking today about hopeful living, and that's intentionally, F-U-L-L. How do we live hopeful living? I turned to this passage in Ephesians. Ephesians is a stick of dynamite. I've been doing studying for 2 weeks, just immersing myself in this book. Ephesians is a little different than a lot of Paul's letters. Most of Paul's letters are written to deal with an issue in the church. Most of the issue in the early church was about racial enmity. That was a big issue, Jew and Gentile. And Paul has to write in Romans, he has to write in Corinthians, and he has to scold Peter in Galatians to really say that God has made one new humanity out of the two. Quit trying to walk around with God in your hip pocket. Quit trying to assign God to your political party. Quit trying to act like God owes you something. God is restoring and redeeming and creating a new humanity. So he deals with Romans who are struggling with Jew and Gentile, and Corinthians who are elevating one from another of who has the best spiritual gifts, and Galatians where people are coming in and saying, well, you need to be Jewish and follow our customs before you let those dirty Gentiles in. But in Ephesians, it's really, really different. And the reason is, two reasons. One, Paul's not writing to one church in Ephesians. I got to do a lot of Bible study today, so if it's a little dry, forgive me. I'll go into my pen and Methodistal close next week. But we got to do some deep dive preaching and teaching in this. Ephesians, the church at Ephesus, he's not writing to one church. He's writing to several churches. That is in this region of today would be Western Turkey. In that day and age, it was a province that the Romans called Asia. And so he's writing to, most scholars believe, 7 or 8 churches. He's not dealing with one issue. And most scholars that I agree with believe that Paul was writing this letter from prison. We know of 2 imprisonments of Paul, Caesarea Philippi early on in his journey, and later in Rome where he was executed by the empire, right? Not for preaching Jesus, but really for bringing people together, if you read Acts 22:22. But most credible scholars, I believe in, if you read in Acts what happens in Ephesus, that Paul had an interim imprisonment, and that he wrote Ephesians from prison at the same time writing Colossians and Philemon. So Paul isn't dealing with one issue. He's dealing with kind of the global issue of what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus Christ, and what does it mean to be Christ's church, which you heard what Flora said, which is Christ's body in the world, to share Christ being over all and in all. And so we did a series on Ephesians years ago. We did probably about 8 weeks, and we called it Blueprints. And that's a good actual title. Sometimes we title stuff, and afterwards I go, where did I come up with that? But that was actually a good title, because Ephesians is a blueprint for living out our journey individually and corporately as raised people, which is what we are, as raised people with new life, with a living hope in the world. And if you study Ephesians, the first 3 chapters, okay, are basically Paul laying the foundation. And then the last 3 chapters, chapters 4 through 6, talks about then living out our mission in the world. So if you want to really take a deep dive study of Ephesians, first 3 chapters lay the foundation, and then the last 3 chapters, which ends in what? Putting on the whole armor of God in chapter 6, and withstanding the wiles of the devil, because it is your call to speak truth to power and live out of God's power in the world. So in the first 3 chapters, Paul starts, this is kind of introductory, and I love that Paul, starts by acknowledging the foundation of the Christian life. Notice what he says. Here's the foundation for us having a living hope. He said, I've heard of your faith in the Lord Jesus and your love toward all the saints, and for this reason, I give thanks. Paul has come so far. See, as a former Pharisee, Saul, the Pharisees were notorious. They had what was called the tradition of the elders. Jesus kind of rebukes it. If you read Matthew 23, he's rebuking the Pharisees. And he says, you've made religion such a burden. And read Matthew 23. He said, you've made religion such a burden that you're preparing people for hell more than heaven. That's what he says. And not only do you not go into the grace of God, but you stand in the doorway and block so others can't go in. And the Pharisees, what they were notorious for was they took the law of Moses and then they added all these religious rules to it. So there were cleanliness laws of how you would come into the temple or who you could, if you were clean enough to go to make a sacrifice. But then they would just add rules upon rules upon rules. It was thousands of rules on the other rules. My kids yell at me about this. In the holidays, we love to play games and board games, and I'm sorry, I have competition strength. I'm a little competitive. I'm not competitive with my 3-year-old granddaughter yet. Let her get 16, right? I want to win. And my kids get so mad at me. We were playing these games, and they're like, Dad, you are making up rules as you go. Like, we've read the instructions. And I'll be like, well, no, this is how we always played it. And they're like, yeah, we were born in the 90s. You were born in the 60s. Okay, we don't know how you played it. And then you know what card I pull out of my pocket? Well, these are house rules. You ever said that? Like Monopoly, there's rules, there's house rules. Like if you don't get an extra $500 when you hit free parking, you can't play Monopoly at my house. That is a house rule. Unless you're winning, and then I make up that the 6th time around, God said, But that's what the Pharisees did. They had all these house rules. And Jesus walked into this, and there were people that were just oppressed, and they were cut off, and they could get to Jesus. That's why he went out where they were and sat at tables with him, right? They played games, testing him, and he walked into this situation of rules. I love Maundy Thursday. We've celebrated during Easter. I made soup, and other people made soup. And people always wonder, why do they call Good Friday good? It doesn't seem like a good day. Why they call Maundy Thursday Monday? That's where communion started. Because it comes from the Latin word mandate, where Jesus gave the commandment. He gave one commandment. Jesus makes stuff so simple. The church makes stuff so hard. And he basically said, I know Moses gave you 10 commandments, but let me tell you, I'm going to give you one. You couldn't follow 10? Try one. Love others the way I've loved you. That's it. Just do that. And do you remember when there was a Bible teacher, a lead pastor, a Pharisee came to Jesus and said, what do I have to do to inherit the kingdom of God? Jesus kept it simple. Love God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. And love your neighbor. Do that. Do that, and you'll be okay. Look how far Paul's come. I've heard that you love God and you love your neighbors. You love certain saints? No, you love, come on, you know that word. All the saints, right? So you love God and you love neighbor, and Paul goes, that's enough, we have a church. Isn't that beautiful? Liberated from religion, right? And this is the foundation. Paul says, for this reason, that you love God and you love others, I'm giving thanks for you, and thus he prays. And I got to break down his prayer for you. Paul prays that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, what does he pray for? He prays that God may give you a spirit of wisdom and revelation, and that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened so you perceive a few things. He's praying, he's saying you know about some things in your head, but it's a difference between knowing about God and knowing God. I want you to know God. I don't want it to be in your head. I want to get down the boiler room of your life. I want to get into your heart, which in that day and age, in the Hebrew and Greek understanding, the heart didn't mean Valentine's Day or sentimentality or the organ that beats in the center of my chest. Your heart was the center of who you were. I want you to be saturated with this good news of Jesus Christ, that it gets down into your operating system. And for that to happen, I need you to get wisdom. Jesus was the bringer of wisdom, revelation, have your heart enlightened. This is what Paul's praying for. So that, right, I have that underlined because I've taught you a lot on this. That's what they call in Greek a henne clause. Jesus prayed in John 17, we talked about that Monday, Thursday. I'm praying not just for these, but for all of us, those who are to come, that they would be completely one. Not to be in all these separate denominations, not to be white church and black church and Hispanic church and conservative church and liberal church and churches speaks in tongues and churches don't speak to anybody. Like, I don't want that. I want my people to be completely one. And what does he say? So that, if you read John 17, they'll know the gospel's true. Because if they see the other stuff, other groups in the world, those are clubs. People in the world can do clubs, right? I travel around the country speaking that. I'm amazed there are Browns clubs in almost every city in the country. And I go, why? I'm from there, like, right? But Jesus, I want you to be extraordinary. I want my people to look different. See, if N.T. Wright is right, and he's one of the greatest New Testament scholars, he said what Paul is talking about in Ephesians is I want them to be kind of a small sample of what life in the kingdom looks like. Jesus did not call the church to prepare people to go to heaven. He didn't call the church to be a little enclave of people to hide out and wait for the bus to heaven to show up. He called us to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world, to go into all of the world with this message. N.T. White called us, we're to be a heaven plus earth community, not an either or. See, Jesus wasn't raised from the tomb to take us to heaven. He was raised from the tomb to empower us to bring heaven to earth. And that's why I said, when you pray, pray this way, thy kingdom come, thy will be on earth as it is in heaven. That's why I said, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loose in heaven, right? We treat this like, well, I'll save that for the last point. But this is where we're going. I want you to have your eyes open, the eyes of your heart, so that what? 3 things will happen. See, you wonder, I'm the only person that preaches with 3 points. So does Paul. So it's biblical. Now, okay. 3 things. First, I want you to perceive the hope to which he has called you. I'm going to just do a little corniness this morning. Say that word with me, hope. First, 1, hope. 2, I want you to know the riches of his inheritance among the saints. Let's say that word, inheritance. You're doing good. 3, the third thing, I want your eyes to be open so that you'll perceive the immeasurable greatness of his power. Say power. Hope, inheritance, power. If I'm preaching this morning so that you will come to this communion table to fuel hope, know your inheritance, and receive his power. That's how you develop a living hope. Okay, ready? Let's go. Fuel hope, that's the first thing. He wants us to know the importance of hope. Isn't it interesting? Paul is in prison, and the first thing he prays for, the first priority, I'm praying so that with the eyes of your heart enlightened, you might perceive what? The hope to which he has called you. Not the hope of this world, not the things we hope for in this world. Big picture hope, right? God, it's very interesting. The Greek word for hope is the word elpis. I love it because I spell it this way. It's pronounced elpis. Like living hope can give you peace. See, our English word doesn't help it. Because in the Greek, what the biblical hope means, watch this, it signifies a confident expectation, an absolute trust, a joyful anticipation, rather than just a desire. Have you noticed how we use the word hope? I really hope the Cavs make the second round of the playoffs, right? You guys are really dry. Heritage even laughed. What's wrong with you people? You all become Episcopalian like overnight? Sorry, I'm going to go to hell for that one. Some of my best friends are Episcopalian. No, I hope the Browns have a good draft. Hey. I hope the weather someday goes above 40 degrees in Cleveland. Hey. Now y'all are there. Hey. Oh, okay, we're getting there. See, when somebody say to you, do you think that's the truth? What do we say? I hope so. See, what happens with our English word of hope is it implies uncertainty. It conveys uncertainty, not biblical hope. That's why, those early Christians said in the book of Hebrews, we have this hope, a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul. There was no uncertainty. You can mortgage your house on the hope that we have in Jesus Christ because God raised him from the dead. I don't need a good sermon. I don't need a proof text. I don't need a biblical degree. God raised Jesus. That settles it. I can count on the hope of the gospel in him. There is a certainty in it, rather, in this hope. And I got to tell you, we can't live without hope. Science says this. Science says hopeful students score better, hopeful athletes perform better, hopeful adults live longer. We are in need of hope, a hope that lasts, a hope that goes the distance. I studied in college, one of the books that really kind of changed my life was Viktor Frankl, this old book. It was called Man's Search for Meaning. And Viktor Frankl was a Jewish doctor who the Nazis took into the death camps. And they kept him alive basically so he could keep others alive, so they could work him to death. And Viktor Frankl wrote about this coming out of the death camps. And he said, why is it that I saw some people did one of three things in the death camps. One, they just withered up and died. Two, they became bad. They started collaborating with the Nazis. They started, mistreating the other neighbors. It was survival of the fittest. Or three, they kept their dignity. They stayed the same way. They loved the people around them. And he said, the only difference I saw between the three groups of people is that third group had hope. Had hope. And he wrote this. He said, life in a concentration camp exposes your soul's foundation. Only a few of the prisoners were able to keep their full inner liberty and strength. Life only has meaning in any circumstances if we have a hope that neither suffering, circumstances, or death itself can destroy. We need hope. That's why Paul's praying for hope, right? He's in prison. I'd be praying for freedom. I'd be praying for justice. I'd be praying for vengeance. Why does Paul pray for hope? Because he knows the power of a living hope, not a hope on the sideline, not a hope the Browns win, I hope I lose 10 pounds. No, a certain and sure and steadfast hope that I can bank on, that I can count on. That is a firm foundation on which to build my life. And Paul said we need that hope. That's why Nelson Mandela, when he was in prison in Robbins Island for 27 years, when his daughter brought him about 12 years in, his firstborn grandchild, in that culture, it was the responsibility of the maternal grandfather to name their grandchild. And when they brought his first granddaughter to him, he could have named her Justice. He could have named her Freedom. He named her Hope. Because hope does not disappoint. And it is a fuel for us to fuel our faith. Okay, and the second thing that fuels our hope is to know your inheritance. Did you hear that? Paul said, I pray so that you may perceive what is the riches of your glory. I messed it up. I said your inheritance. The Bible doesn't say that, does it? It says whose inheritance? His. Referring to who? God. God has an inheritance? Isn't that wild? Do you know what your inheritance is? It's your worth. It's your net worth, right? If all of your assets are in one particular property when you die, that's your worth. That's what goes on to your heirs, right? And it's really the most valuable thing in your life. Can you imagine what they say, like 5 or 6 mega billionaires? I'm not talking about the guys that have 1 or 2, but hundreds and hundreds of billions. There's like 4 or 5 or 6 of them that own 60% of the wealth in America. That's not kingdom economics, by the way. But can you imagine trying to buy a birthday present for one of those guys? What do you get? And not only that, what do you get to give them that they would say, once they got it, oh my gosh, this is the most valuable thing I have in my life. This is more valuable than everything else I own combined. That's kind of wild, isn't it? We're talking about God when they say they have more money in God. No, they don't. No, they don't. I love the old preachers used to quote Psalm 50:10. God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and then they'd say, and he owns the hills too. He owns the planets, he owns the stars, he owns the solar systems, he owns the universe. He owns all of history. And God has something more precious to him than anything else of his whole creation? What in the world? What's God's inheritance? What did Jesus come to earth and die for? They said for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. What did Jesus not have before the cross that he had after the cross? Us. You. Me. We are God's inheritance. Don't believe me? Look how Paul talks. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. That one blows my mind. Because if Jesus Christ is the firstborn of the dead, that means he is our older brother, right? He is the first oldest brother. In that day and age, the lion's share of the inheritance went to the older brother. But Jesus Christ is not stuck in the institutions and the isms and the injustices of this world. He is an older brother that doesn't hoard his share. He is an older brother that says, what I have, I give to you. And what the Father has given me, so I give to you. We are God's. You hearing this language? And Peter, think about Peter. Peter's the one that wrote that we have new birth into living hope. Peter, I loved O'Neill last week, man, when she shared about Peter and Judas at the end, and the only difference between their outcomes was hope. I told her, get that down in your book quick, because people will steal the intellectual property. They've stolen all mine on the Tower of Babel of the second fall of humanity because I didn't write it down quick enough. It's being preached all over the place. I'm hearing it in different articles. But I think that was so awesome because Peter blew it every bit as much as Judas did. In fact, we should have known that because at the Last Supper, Judas was sitting next to Jesus. And when they said, who will betray me? He said, the one who dips what we're going to do in my cup. They betrayed me. And we said, yeah, Judas dipped in the cup. Yeah. And then it said, and all the others did the same. Peter blew it. Even though I must die with you, I'll never deny you. And, friends, the Bible sometimes just reveals things. I've revealed things. Let me just teach you a little something about Peter. Do you know there's only 2 times in the New Testament or in the entire Bible that the term charcoal fire is used? Twice. First one time, when Peter denied Jesus. He, around a charcoal fire, 3 times he's asked, are you one of his followers? And he's, Jesus who? Don't know the man. And then after the resurrection, thank God for John 21, when Jesus goes to find Peter, do you remember what the angels say? Go and tell my disciples and Peter. I love that. Peter was one of the disciples. Why did the angel say, go and find the disciples and Peter? Because I know Peter is broken. Because I know Peter is hurting. Because I know Peter thinks he has no value. But go tell him I'm coming to him again. I have more work for God will never give up on you. It doesn't matter when you feel unworthy, when you feel you have no worth, that's not from Jesus. I got news for you. And it says in John 21, when Jesus called him again and Peter was naked and he was in shame, he came flying to Jesus like a madman. And guess what? Jesus had built a charcoal fire. He took him back to the scene of the crime. And he said, Peter, I love you. Look what I've done for you. Do you love me? And 3 times, as many times as Peter broke down, The bandages of Jesus' grace healed his wounds. And it's Peter who could say, now we've been given new birth into a living hope, and you are a chosen people now, God's special possession. That word in the Greek is parapoiesis, which means an absolute and precious treasure without price. Do you know how much valued you are to God? Paul says, I want your heart to be smitten with how God looks at you, how God values you. And I'll give you hope, right? Let me tell you, friends, I've blown it. I'm going to venture to say I've blown it in my life more than many of you, but probably most of you. There are countless charcoal fires God had to take me to look square in the face of my failures. But every single time, he let me know that I have worth to him. And even when I feel worthless, if you feel worthless or you feel broken, let me tell you, God says, I love you. You have worth. That'll get you through. We were at a banquet for City Mission. We have some leaders here with City Mission, and our church invested in Lord's Home and other things, and we went to their banquet. And I was amazed, they've got all this Elevate, Living Stories of Hope, and then this Rise program, helping our residents rise, don't they, through the power of hope. And they had these video testimonies, and the second one was by a guy named Bob, and Bob was struggling, and he was on the street, and these Christians through this community came into his life, and he found a place to live, and he found people who cared about him. And it really broke me. And when I left that night, the only thing I could think about was his line when he said, the Lord revealed to me that even the least of us have worth, have value. And I gave him hope. And it should give us hope too. Last point in the few minutes I got left. I got started late, so y'all pray for me. Okay. We fuel our hope when we receive power. So he prays that we would know the hope to which we've been called, know our value, that we're our inheritance, and receive God's power. Fuel our hope by knowing God's power. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead is available to you now, right? I remember when I was writing this, Pastor Terry's back there today. She's helped me. Joe's out of town, and we were doing the old Batman and Robin get down the hall, and I was remember looking at Pastor Terry in that front row. My mind went back to 2007. My middle son was 16. He was born with a funny sounding heart, and high athletics, and we never could totally lay it down, and always make sure an AED was at the basketball arena or the golf course. And in 27, his heart started racing playing ball, and he'd be out of breath, and they needed to do ablation surgery. Now, ablation surgery is not major heart surgery, but put your teenage son in heart surgery in the same sentence. It gets major, right? Doesn't matter, And so we were down there and waiting for him to go through this, and Terry and I were a little unnerved, my wife and I, and the physician, I think, could tell that. Thank God for the Cleveland Clinic. Number one in heart in the entire world is right here in Cleveland. Okay, why don't they have Cleveland Clinic clubs all over? That's just odd. Anyhow, but, Perry's got a heart thing, and the surgeon, I could tell, could think we were a little unraveled. So he took us back in the operating room, and he said, here's what we're going to do. And then he looked at me and said, Reverend Freed, now you know the Cleveland Clinic. He said, if your son was the son of the Prince of Saudi Arabia, he'd be in this room having this surgery. And that helped. Didn't fix it. I was still a little, until we're out in the waiting room, and Perry's sitting by us, and Pastor Terry walked off the elevator. And she walked right past Terry and I, and she just laid her hand on Perry and said, may the same power that raised Jesus from the dead be upon you. And at that moment, I knew it was going to be all right. I didn't know if the surgery was going to go all right. I didn't know if my son's health would be all right. But guess what I knew? The sure foundation. It's going to be all right. And that's what Paul said. I want you to know the immeasurable power. He's taunting the empire when he speaks these words, power and authority. I mean, Caesar had a cult in Ephesus, right? And he knew when he said, put on the whole armor of God that we can withstand. We battle not against flesh and blood, but about principalities and power in high places. Paul knew them were fighting words, But he also knew that the church of God was a church to bring heaven to earth. It was not a church of the empire. It was not a Roman church. It was not a church to be co-opted or represented the puny countries of this world in which we reside. It was a church to speak truth to power when the empire goes off rails. It was a church to bring power on earth as it is in heaven, and to come out and live this living hope of power in the midst of this world. And that's why we as Christians are called to represent this power. That's why when Jesus was raised, he said, all authority on heaven and on, yeah, watch that, has been given to me, and so I give it to you. Now go, what, to prayer meeting? Go, what, to a bunker to hide out until the bus to heaven shows up? Go into all the world and preach the good news and baptize people into new life like we celebrated last week, and teach everything that I've taught you. Go and live this power in the world. N.T. Wright, who I mentioned, I'm wrapping up, he wrote this about Ephesians. He said, people often think of the ascension as Jesus going off to a distant, remote place called heaven, a long way from here. But in the Bible, heaven is the CEO's office. It's the place from which the world is run. Jesus is seated at the right hand of God, right? Jesus is the Father's right-hand man with all authority on heaven and on earth. The purpose of God is not to save humans from the world, but to save humans for the world. And in that faith, the church must be prepared to confront principalities and powers. Jesus has already been given authority over every other rule. And Paul heaps up terms like rule, authority, power, lordship, titles in terms of that the worldly powers may evoke in the present age. But if we think for a moment of all the names that dominate our news, the names that conjure with in our world, we need to remind ourselves that, unlikely though it may seem, the name of Jesus outshines them all. That's fighting talk, as Paul knew well, and as he'll explain in Ephesians 6, to put on the whole order. At the end of Revelation, in the New Jerusalem, the new heaven and earth, God's people are not just worshipers, they're workers, bringing on God's new creation. I want to sit down, I really do, but I can't preach this without going into my earthly prophet's life. I told my wife, I really try, not to bring Dr. King into every single sermon I preach. I try. But when I was thinking of this, I was transported into his last sermon, his last speech on this earthly life. Jim, some of you know it, right? I've been to the mountaintop. If you don't know it, YouTube it. It's just amazing, the sermon he preached before an assassin's bullet took him from this world. Literally hours. But we all remember, I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. Oh, wasn't that nice? God gave Dr. King a vision of heaven. Well, you need to back up in that speech, because King wasn't talking about heaven. He was talking about here. Before we get to the mountaintop, let me hear what's in that sermon. Here's what he wrote, and I got to share this with you. I couldn't share it this morning. I got to get it out of me. He said, Dr. King, this last night, he said, it's all right to talk about long white robes over yonder in all of its symbolism, but ultimately people want some suits and dresses and shirts to wear down here. It's all right to talk about the streets flowing with milk and honey, but God commanded us to be concerned about poverty down here now and his children who can't eat 3 square meals a day. It's all right to talk about the New Jerusalem, but one day God's preachers better start talking about the new New York, the new Atlanta, the new Philadelphia, the new Los Angeles, and where he was, the new Memphis. That's what we have to do. And it's only when he said that he could say, I'd like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not worried about that. I just want to do God's will. And God has taken me to the mountaintop, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land, and I may not get there with you. See, he was not talking about heaven. Dr. King wasn't saying, well, I don't know if I'm going to get to heaven. He said, no, I've seen the promised land, and it's free of apartheid, and it's free of racism, and it's free of poverty, and it's free of injustice, and it's what I've seen here now. I may not get there with you, but one day God will wash this land clean. and justice will roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And because he saw that, he could say his last words, and I'm happy tonight. Think about that. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man or woman. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He has trampled out the vineyards where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed his fitful lightning like his terrible swift sword. I've seen the promised land. Friends, that was the power that God gave him. And God gives us to live hope. Not hope on the sideline, not hope in pie in the sky and the sweet by and by, but to live as heavenly, not just bound people, but heavenly belonging people. Paul said we're a colony of heaven to represent God's power. And so when you come to this table, I'm done. I pray that you'll come to feel hope, to know your inheritance, and to receive the power, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead. And that'll give you staying power. That'll give you perseverance. That'll make you a person of greatness. Come to his table with a heart open to that. Amen?